The night was quiet in Cardiff, but on Newport Road, a single house hummed with the hidden energy of a lucrative secret. Inside, rows of cannabis plants glowed under bright lamps, their leafy scent filling every corner. To the outside world, it looked like any ordinary home, but inside, it was a fortress of wealth and risk, a place where one wrong move could change everything. Two men were approaching that house from London, confident and eager. Tomasz Waga and his accomplice, Davies, had traveled hours with a single goal in mind: to take thousands of pounds worth of cannabis and escape before anyone noticed. They believed it would be simple, a quick in and out, no confrontation, no consequences. They had no idea how wrong they were. Welcome to Britain's Dark Files, the channel where we reveal the chilling truths behind Britain's real crimes, not just what happened, but how everyday choices spiral into irreversible tragedy. Tonight, you'll see how a seemingly straightforward theft escalated into a brutal killing and left lives shattered forever. And if you want to follow more true UK crime stories like this, take a moment to like this video and subscribe. Your support keeps these dark files open. The closer they got, the more the thrill of easy money clouded their judgment. A ladder was set against the wall, and Tomasz climbed silently, peering through the window. Inside, the plants shimmered under the grow lights, almost hypnotic in their abundance. Carl followed, both unaware that this night would not go as planned. Minutes later, they would step through the door of the grow house and unknowingly step into a world where defense of territory was not negotiable, where a guardian's anger could turn lethal in seconds. And by the end of this night, the consequences would be irreversible. What began as a crime of opportunity was about to become a deadly confrontation, one that would mark Cardiff forever. The moment Tomasz Waga and Davies stepped inside the grow house, a sense of triumph washed over them. The air was thick with the pungent smell of cannabis, and the soft hum of fans filled the room. Rows upon rows of plants stood neatly arranged, each one carefully nurtured and brimming with value. To them, it was a fortune just waiting to be taken, proof that their daring plan was about to pay off. They moved quickly, cutting down plants and stuffing them into sheets. Every movement was calculated, yet every second brought them closer to a danger they could not see. Outside, the quiet night betrayed no hint of what was about to unfold, but the grow house was not unguarded. This wasn't just a hobby operation, it was a sophisticated, heavily protected cultivation site, and those responsible for it were alert and ready. As Tomasz worked, Carl kept watch, glancing nervously toward the windows and doors. The thrill of theft mingled with a creeping sense of unease, but they brushed it aside, convinced that speed would be their shield. They didn't know that a storm was already approaching. Meanwhile, the gang who ran the grow house had been alerted. Words of the intrusion had passed along quickly, and plans to confront the intruders were forming. Their anger was immediate, personal, and calculated. What had been a simple theft in the minds of Tomasz and Carl was about to trigger a violent response that would leave one man dead and another barely alive. In these tense moments, the rules of the criminal underworld became clear. A stolen fortune cannot be ignored, and a break-in is never just a crime, it's a provocation. And as the men continued their work, oblivious to the growing threat, the seeds of a deadly encounter had already been sown. Minutes that felt like hours would pass before the first shout rang out, the first weapon was raised, and the night's true horror began. This robbery was no longer about money. It was about survival, and neither Tomasz nor Carl could know how high the stakes had truly become. The tension erupted without warning. What had started as a calculated theft exploded into chaos the instant the gang arrived. Doors banged, footsteps pounded, and shouting filled the grow house, mixing with the hum of the ventilation systems. Tomasz Waga and Davies barely had time to react before the situation turned violent. A baseball bat swung, a brick crashed, and bamboo sticks cracked against walls and furniture. Fear replaced the thrill of the theft as Tomasz tried to shield himself, while Carl fought to escape the sudden onslaught. The intruders' confidence vanished in the first moments of the attack, replaced by adrenaline and panic. Every second counted, every choice meant the difference between life and death. Tomasz was struck repeatedly. Blow after blow landed with brutal precision, each one driving him closer to collapse. Carl managed to duck behind a counter, desperately searching for a way out, but the attackers were relentless. The grow house, once a source of easy money, had transformed into a battlefield. The air smelled of sweat, fear, and the faint tang of the cannabis they had come to steal. As the violence escalated, it became clear that escape was no longer an option for Tomasz. He was dragged, struck, and left vulnerable while Carl found a narrow window to flee. The scene was pure chaos, overturned trays, broken equipment, and the desperate sounds of a man fighting for his life. In the middle of this horror, the reality of what had been set in motion hit. A robbery intended to be quick and silent had spiraled into a deadly confrontation. One man would escape with his life, battered and shaken, while the other would soon pay the ultimate price. If you're finding this story shocking so far, take a moment to share it. Crimes like this show just how quickly ambition can turn into tragedy. By the end of this night, nothing would be the same for anyone involved. The aftermath was brutal and immediate. Tomasz Waga, badly injured from the attack, could barely move. Carl Davies, bleeding and shaken, stumbled into the night, his heart pounding as adrenaline pushed him forward. Sirens soon pierced the air, and the reality of the violence began to set in. The police were called, neighbors whispered about the chaos, and the grow house, once a secret haven of illicit wealth, was now a crime scene stained with blood and broken ambition. Paramedics worked frantically, but Tomasz's injuries were catastrophic. He had been beaten relentlessly, suffering severe head trauma and multiple fractures. The severity of the assault left little doubt. This was no ordinary confrontation. This was retribution delivered with calculated brutality. Despite medical intervention, he would not survive. What began as a theft had escalated beyond imagination, a human life snuffed out in the span of minutes. Meanwhile, police launched an immediate investigation. Officers cordoned off the grow house, collected evidence, and interviewed witnesses. Surveillance footage, phone records, and forensic findings began to paint a clear picture of the events inside. Every piece of evidence told the same story. Tomasz and Carl had entered a trap, and the gang that ran the grow house had responded with lethal intent. Carl's account, though fragmented and full of shock, confirmed the violent encounter. His escape and injuries were critical to understanding how quickly the situation spiraled out of control. Investigators began piecing together the sequence of attacks, the identities of the gang members, and their movements before and after the assault. The seriousness of the crime, murder, aggravated assault, and organized retaliation became undeniable. What this case revealed was a harsh reality. A moment of greed, a single criminal decision, can trigger irreversible consequences. Lives are changed forever, and the law will not overlook deliberate violence. Tomasz Waga's death was a tragic testament to how quickly crime can turn deadly, and the investigation was only just beginning. By the time the story reached court, the question was no longer what happened. It was who would be held accountable and how severely. The courtroom was tense, filled with the weight of what had happened that night on Newport Road. Every detail of the grow house raid was laid bare, from the carefully planned theft to the brutal attack that left Tomasz Waga dead and Carl Davies barely alive. Witnesses recounted the chaos, evidence showed the organized nature of the assault, and the jury listened as the prosecution detailed the sequence of events that had transformed a robbery into murder. The gang responsible for the attack, Josif Nushi, Mihal Dhana, and Hysland Aliaj, had acted with deliberate force. Their intent had been clear, their actions brutal, and the consequences irreversible. Tomasz Waga, merely in the wrong place at the wrong time, had paid the ultimate price, while Carl Davies' narrow escape underscored just how close he had come to the same fate. The court heard how the weapons, a bat, a brick, bamboo sticks, were used with precision and aggression, leaving no doubt that this was an execution disguised as retaliation. Sentencing brought a mixture of relief and finality. Life imprisonment was handed down to the convicted men, with minimum terms that reflected the severity of their crime. The judge emphasized the calculated nature of the attack and the extreme violence inflicted upon the victims. It was a stark reminder that the law sees beyond excuses, that premeditation and intent carry consequences that cannot be avoided. Outside the courtroom, the reality of the tragedy lingered. Tomasz Waga's death left a family in mourning, a friend in shock, and a community shaken. Carl Davies, though alive, carried the physical and emotional scars of that night. The Grow House, once a target of ambition and greed, had become a scene of horror and irreversible loss. If you've been following this story, take a moment to like, comment, and subscribe to Britain's Dark Files for more chilling true crime stories from the UK. This case reminds us that crime rarely stays contained. One reckless decision, one moment of greed, can ignite a chain of events that destroys lives, and the echoes of that night in Cardiff will not soon be forgotten.